My colleague Nick at the back has a microphone and is ready to rove. Would anyone like to pose the first question in the front row?
Well, I can imagine most people here, I've been very involved in wanting the people's vote and still do, really. But increasingly people say, what if it went the other way? What if we got, a solid vote for exiting the common market, the European Union? We'd then, be in a worse position than we are now, even with Theresa May's deal. And although you say, polls and things are showing that the great likelihood, and God knows I hope you're right, it could be not like that. We know polls aren't always correct, and I find that a very frightening prospect.
Shall I take two or three together? Please.
Yeah, perhaps this follows on, because obviously we're here in lovely North London where we all agree on this point. But I wonder, have you, when you're speaking around the country, have you been at events where you've also had to dialogue with leavers in the audience? And there are people all over the country and in London who, in their communities and even on social media, have to try to speak and engage with leavers and get quite upset and distressed and frustrated sometimes at trying to talk to people who don't seem to want to listen. So do you have any advice on how to handle that?
Great. Shall I take a third?
And the gentleman in the blue shirt there.
First of all, thank you very, very much for your wonderful, charismatic leadership for Remainers. And that brings me to my question. I'm impressed by you. I'm impressed by the energy among grassroots Remainers. What I'm concerned about is our fragmentation. I don't feel we have a coherent movement, and I think we may be losing out because of that. And I wonder if you have any advice on how we can get more coherence and more of a thrust as a movement.
Yeah. These very, very good questions. Shall I just take them one by one? Of course, if you hold a democratic exercise, you can't be certain what the result is. We could lose. It is my view we will only lose if we fail to mobilise and organise. We did fail to mobilise and organise properly 3 years ago, particularly amongst the young, and that's the reason why we're in this mess. We must not repeat that mistake. What I am not prepared to do, though, and I hope you're not either, is to give a veto over the democratic future of this country to Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. The moment we start doing that, let alone Tommy Robinson and those people who say they're going to get onto the streets, we are finished as a serious country if we start doing that. So we have to win this, in my view. We cannot afford to lose it. We need to mobilise, and that means we've got to be really robust. Now, the point then about the people who voted leave is hugely important. Now, I have been doing meetings up and down the country. As I say, I haven't actually done that many in London. Most of the ones I've done have been well outside London, including many with lots of leavers on. It is my view now, after intense engagement over the last year, that the number of people who voted leave because they are passionately concerned about the European Union isn't very high. There is a passionate minority who do genuinely believe that it's wrong to pool sovereignty, who've got it fixed in their mind that there are all these Eurocrats. Part of the reason why they do it's very clear to me is because of 30 years of the Daily Mail and the Sun, that they do believe that this is profoundly undemocratic institutions. They're leeching all the money, that we're being told what to do by Brussels bureaucrats. None of it is in fact true, but there are a group who believe that. However, that is not, in my view, the reason why we lost the referendum 3 years ago. The reason we lost the referendum 3 years ago is because we have had 10 years of really, really serious economic crisis and social crisis in this country, which has particularly affected people beyond the commuting zone to London, because the London economy has been reasonably resilient, but not beyond. We've had a 10% cut in real wages. We've had austerity, which I think was a very misguided policy, while we've got real wages declining, also to be slashing local authority budgets, which means longer queues at the GP, not being able to get your children into local schools, particularly in the context of more immigration, which as it happens, I'm in favour of immigration. But when immigration plus austerity is a real toxic combination, because it's that leads to longer queues at the GPs, not being able to get your kids into the schools, the rubbish not being collected and things of that kind. So what do we need to do? Just to complete the point. Therefore, what happened 3 years ago was a vote against all of that. If the question on the ballot paper 3 years ago had been, do you want to end austerity, there would have been 90% in favour. If in the Midlands and the North the question had been, do you want a fundamental change in your relationship with Westminster, that would have been carried by about 80%. But the only thing people were asked was, do you want to leave the European Union? So what we've got to do in the next referendum is we've obviously got to get our arguments better. We're not, thank God, going to be led by Cameron and Osborne, so we'll actually, and we need to get all of that right. We need to have a strongly and powerfully pro-European message, because it's very hard to make an argument for staying in the club if the people making the argument don't really believe in staying in the club anyway. So we need to have an argument that Europe works, that it is not like Heathcliff in the attic, the worst, the least worst option. It is actually a positive good. We need to say all of that. But we also need to have proper policies in place for what's going to happen in place of austerity. How do we get more power devolved from this over-centralised country that we've got here down to local communities? How do we make a decent offer for kids who aren't going to university, who at the moment are thrown onto the scrap heap? What do we do to see that people haven't got to queue for 8 hours in the A&E? We've got to have all of that sorted and a proper policy in place and prospectus for reform. And if we do that, then, and mobilise the young in a serious way, then I'm absolutely confident that we can win. And I've now forgotten, the third question, which was what can we do to unite more? That was the point, wasn't it? What can we do to unite more? How can we bring ourselves together more? Well, we are sort of doing it here. I mean, I imagine that we're representatives of lots of political parties here, different walks of life and all of that. The People's Vote campaign has done a great job of bringing people together. When I was doing a tour of Scotland recently, I even had Labour and SNP people in the same hall, which I'm told had never happened before. I mean, this is actually bridging divides, and people are coming together, which is important. I am starting to think, though, can I try an idea out on you? Because I know that everything I say in this hall between my 300 closest friends will be extremely confidential. We have these European elections coming up in 7 weeks' time, quite likely. Now, can I say I welcome those European elections? I want to turn those European elections into a referendum on Brexit and staying in. But we're going to have Farage out there with his Brexit party. I'm wondering whether we should have a Remain party, which brings together the Lib Dems, the Greens, the Tiggers, I hope the Labour Party too. How about it? How many of you think it would be a good idea? We have and what this party should have, because this is the big burning issue which faces the country, is it should just have two policies. A referendum, and if the referendum is carried, revoke. That should be its policy. So we should turn this into a referendum on Europe. Obviously then, when we have policies beyond that, people will differ to some extent, but I'm hopeful that people will stand on a big reform plan, but beyond that to some extent. But I think we have got to start coming together in a really big way. These European elections could be the golden opportunity to do so, but we could funk it. We could all be allotment-minded and all be in separate allotments. Jeremy likes allotments. So I don't know where this one is going. No, we don't talk about allotments. We could be balkanised. No, we don't like that either. But you know what I mean, don't you? We have an option of dividing or uniting. And what we should do in this great cause is to unite. And I think having a common Remain proposition of referendum, revoke, and then we put things right as a country. I think that's probably the best way we could go in the European elections. Another three?
The lady here in the black and here in the second row, and then the lady at the back.
Oh, by the way, I've got to let you in mind. I did a meeting, the other meeting I did in London recently was in Barnet, and somebody came up to me and said, Andrew, I am the councillor for Jeremy Corbyn's allotment. Isn't that wonderful? Because Jeremy Corbyn's allotment is in Barnet. And he said, I personally intervened to see that the allotment wasn't compulsorily purchased a few years ago. So I think this guy, come the Corbyn government, is clearly going to be awarded the Order of Merit. So I thought it was
Okay, speaking of Jeremy Corbyn, you mentioned earlier really about the inevitability of there being a referendum, but to my mind, Jeremy Corbyn is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, impediment, particularly in terms of really getting the Labour Party behind a referendum. He's my MP, and I have written to him very often over the last year or so, and he seems to be moving a bit in the right direction, but what do you think would really get him to put his shoulder behind a second referendum?
So then the lady in the second row here.
You've touched on it a bit, but I'm wondering about the quality of the public discourse around
Yeah.
Europe and around the far right and all these kinds of issues. It's been really disturbing, actually, to have some voices elevated, by the BBC, by other media outlets, and journalists have really struggled to hold, some of these liars and incompetents and charlatans to account. And I was just wondering your thoughts on how we repair that public discourse and bring kind of honesty, truth, integrity back into our expectations for the media and politicians in public life.
Thanks. The third.
And then just at the back there on the edge, right-hand edge.
Thank you very much for your very inspiring speech. I actually used to be one of your civil servants at the Department for Transport, and I thoroughly enjoyed your observations about my current boss. Be
very careful what you say, he has spies everywhere.
I will just keep it in my mind, and if I have to go and brief him. The question is actually slightly related to the first question. I've got a Labour MP. I have been torturing him for about the past year, writing to him, asking him to back a people's vote. Belatedly, he's come across to the side of the Angels. What more can I do, realistically, to actually bring about the possibility of a people's vote?
Keep deluging them with emails, messages, letters, turning up at their surgeries and so on. It makes a difference. It makes a bigger difference than you realise, because you think sometimes that you're bashing your head against a brick wall, but in fact, actually, they do notice that this is happening. And on the business about Jeremy and the Labour Party policy is for a referendum. Jeremy and all but 25 Labour MPs voted for the referendum in these things called indicative votes in the House of Commons last Monday. More than 200 Labour MPs voted for it. The only reason it didn't get over the line, got quite close to the line, the vote on the referendum option was 292 to 280. And if Labour in a united way had voted for the referendum, it would have had a comfortable majority. But Jeremy did vote for it, and the front bench voted for it. We're not completely there. The chairman of the Labour Party didn't vote for it, and so we've still got further to go, but we are getting there. So what we should do is to keep up the pressure. If you're members of the Labour Party, and I assume there'll be quite a few here because it's Islington, keep up the pressure. Emily's constituency party voted by a big majority in favour of a referendum. I imagine that Jeremy's has as well, actually. Is there an Islington North exec people on the GC? I'd be very surprised if Jeremy's GC hasn't voted for a referendum. Certainly that would be the view of most of his members. So keep up the pressure, and I'm absolutely convinced that we could win. So you might prompt me on your question again. The media. Okay, yeah. Very, very simple thing we need to do. The BBC needs to do its job properly. The BBC has not been doing its job properly in the last few years, and it's not. I'm a great fan of public service broadcasting, and I used to be a resolute defender of the BBC. It's the Brexit experience which has caused me great concern, because what's happened on Brexit is not the BBC doing its job of impartial broadcasting, by which I mean calling out lies and having a proper debate which is factually based and representing moderate opinion as well as extreme opinion. What the BBC has done, that I think is seriously at fault, and they still haven't put right, is that they have interpreted being even-handed as giving equal time to the people telling the lies and the people telling the truth. So you had Boris and co all on with the 350 million a week, unchallenged, and then when the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who are the guardians of the truth and the independent bean counters, came along and said that actually there isn't going to be £350 million a week, they were put on the Remain side as if somehow that was another contested opinion against what had happened, the claims that were being made by the Brexiters. Now that, to my mind, is an incorrect interpretation of their role as an impartial state broadcaster. And they're repeating the mistake that they made and have been called out for by Ofcom, who are their regulator, on climate change. Because do you remember on climate change, the BBC went through this terrible period where Nigel Lawson and climate change deniers were allowed on, who claimed that there had been no global warming, that the whole thing was made up, unchallenged, and then the people who said that that wasn't correct were the people who were put on to rebut them. What Ofcom said, because there was a case brought to Ofcom about it, is that that isn't good enough. There is established climate change science, which has established that global warming has taken place. It is therefore not acceptable for people to make these claims on the BBC. And if they do make these claims, even if they're as distinguished as Lord Lawson, then they must be called out. And the same, in my view, should happen on Brexit. And not only that, but also it is quite wrong for the BBC to do what they do every week now on Question Time, which is to find the 15 most raucous Brexiters they can discover anywhere where they're going and put them on against some Remainers and claim that that is a representation of the national debate. It is not. Most people are not wild, extreme Brexiters. They are ordinary, mainstream, moderate people. That's true on the Remain side too, but there are very few wild, extreme Remainers. I'm one of the very, very few of those in the country. Most of them are much more moderate. So what the BBC should be doing is calling out lies in the name of the truth, have a balanced debate, and have the debate properly represented by moderate, mainstream people, and not constantly pulling the debate to extremes, which only fuels the extremists, the Farages, and the Tommy Robinsons. There you are. That's how we get a proper, balanced public debate. Shall I take one more round?
And can I ask one slightly mean question to ask, but what do you think some of the things are that might happen in the next 5 days?
Okay, I need lots of notice to that question.
So that's one question.
Yeah.
And here in the...
Somebody's phoning with the answer. It'll be my good friend Yvette Cooper, because maybe she knows. Thank you.
I don't know whether you may want to talk about this, but obviously we're all quite aware that the Leave campaign during the referendum 3 years ago is now, it seems, increasingly based on a lot of funding, which may not have been entirely legitimate, quite apart from the lies. And obviously that shakes people's view in the legitimacy of the outcome, but the government appear to be doing nothing in response to this.
Very good question. Yeah.
And then maybe there's right in the back row next to Matthias, and then over here on the right. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. Two of the umpteen things that were wrong with the first referendum. One, the choice was binary. B, the phrasing was appalling. Parliament, however, ratified the referendum despite its flaws. So, to the extent that MPs gave the blessings, they are partly responsible for the mess we're in. What do you think both houses of Parliament can do, if there is a second referendum, to ensure that the questions and the way they're phrased do justice to fact? Thank you.
Very good question, yeah. And a final one, maybe?
By the pillar on the...
Hi, I'm Kate Willoughby from Emily Matters. One which, Lord Adonis, you've been doing beautifully today is your passion, speaking from the heart. You've also got a lot of the facts, but I'm just wondering, you've kind of said it but without saying it, but if we do get another vote, obviously calling out the lies, but the Remain side, we've really got to we've not got to be frightened of feelings, because feelings, as we've found, trump facts. We've got to give a really positive message, inclusive, lifting people up, and rather than just words, because I'm a creative actor writer, whether it's through drama, art, so people feel, that they genuinely feel lifted, which the Leave campaign did, but they twisted it. We can do that for good.
That's a great question and point, and I completely agree with it. In the campaign 3 years ago, the video on the Remain side that was most watched was Gordon Brown in the ruins of Coventry Cathedral under the slogan, "Lead, not leave," telling a story, literally walking around the ruins and explaining why it was one still continuing bomb site. And there are two big insights into that. The first is you've got to tell stories. I mean, you know that, and we haven't been good enough. Facts only go so far. Stories go a lot further. But the other thing is we've got to have a positive vision. And I think "Lead, not leave" is a great slogan. After all, that is what we should be doing as a country. We shouldn't be leaving this club. We should be staying, and we should be leading. And why should we be leading? So that those kind of things that Gordon was talking about in Coventry Cathedral don't happen again. So I completely agree. And if I can bring these two elements together. So let me just deal firstly with the illegality. The police have just got to get real. We're 2.5 years since the last referendum. The Serious Crime Agency still hasn't reported yet, the National Crime Agency, on what Aaron Banks was up to with that £8 million donation. People like me can't do anything because of course we have an independent police service, until they've reported. My own view is that if there were breaches of the law, people should be in the courts. If there are serious offences committed, they should probably be behind bars, and they certainly should not be on the field for the next referendum. And we need this because it's bringing the whole system of justice into disrepute. If we go into the next referendum, we still haven't dealt with the allegations of illegality from the last referendums. That's hugely important. But what we've got to do all the time is to join up the short term and the long term. The next 5 days are going to be a whole set of really crucial decisions. The two most important of which are what is the length of time of the extension we're applying for, which is the thing I started with Theresa May ludicrously asking for only 3 months. The European Council will almost certainly say, Prime Minister, would you like to take longer, because we think you might need longer. Parliament will then kick in under the Yvette Cooper bill, assuming it becomes law, and we'll only know that whether we can overcome the filibuster in the House of Lords on tomorrow, which is going to be vital to it becoming law. Under that, she will have to come and formally lay an order before Parliament with the length of time which can be changed. So we can overrule her, if need be, if she doesn't apply for a long enough extension. So the combination of parliamentary pressure on one side and the European Council and our European allies on the other, hopefully, will force her into the long extension. But why is it we need the long extension? Not because we're clueless about what to do, though I think she is clueless about what to do, so that's part of it, but because we do have a big vision. What is our big vision? It is clearer and clearer we should end this national nightmare. It is destroying us as a country. It is undermining our vitality. It is a massive distraction from the big things that really matter to the future of this country, which is the social crisis, the state of our public services, the opportunities for our young people, the homelessness crisis, all of these things. Infrastructure, I love infrastructure. I'm wearing one of my favourite infrastructure ties today. Notice the London Underground. I put this on specially for you because I'm in London. All of those things are the things we should be dealing with, not undermining the trade, the economy and our international relations with Brexit. So we need to constantly join up the short-term, immediate decisions that we have to take with our long-term vision. And our long-term vision could not be clearer. Lead, not leave. Do not trash the country. Europe works. Now that we're on the verge of losing something valuable, as often happens in life, we realise its true value. We will therefore campaign night and day to see that this doesn't happen to us, our families, our communities, our country and Europe. And I cannot think of a bigger and better cause for this generation to fight for than staying in Europe and not trashing our whole future as a country. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And it's a small gift from Islington in Europe, a little something that Petra has knocked up with some great quotes on Brexit.
Oh, it's great. I think it has almost the entire Treaty of Rome is written on the side of it.
Almost possibly. Andrew is going to be here with some of his books. Please feel free to come up and have a chat with him. Others may be interested in then going to the Middleton Arms, which is our pub of choice after this event. I just wanted to say that we are a volunteer group. We try and keep all our events free, but if you're able to maybe donate a couple of quid, it helps us pay for venue hire and printing of leaflets and stuff, and my colleagues are at the back with the buckets if you're able. So our messages would also be, do just keep writing to your MPs. I know it can be very frustrating. I know I wrote 27 letters to Jeremy before I got a reply, but I did get one. Didn't exactly answer any questions, but I did write to him. And so please do keep writing to your MPs, write to the local papers, write to the national papers, write and phone into those phone-ins. Find out some tricks from Andrew of how you get past the gatekeepers on LBC. Some of our colleagues have done that successfully, so do that. And do sign up and join us at Islington in Europe. Twitter, Islington in, islintonineurope.org. But thank you so much all of you for coming, but if we can now raise the Church of England rafters and say thank you so much, Andrew Adonis, for joining us today.